Okay. All right. So I've been wanting to do this video for a long time because um, by doing it, maybe a lot of people can understand where I'm coming from. First of all, for the majority of my life, I was not a Christian. I was raised in a home where my mother claimed to be Christian. I went to church a couple of times. I listened to a few Bible verses throughout the years in a 45-minute Sunday church service, while the rest of the 45 minutes was a preacher talking about his own, life story that goes along with the verses that he brought up. But in actuality, many times the context of the verse is not discussed. And if that's all you do is listen to a person on a podium, then it leaves you susceptible to not really knowing what the context is. In any case, so it comes down to I wasn't a Christian. And there's a lot of parents out there that have this false sense of hope that because their kids decided that they were going to go up and do the Jesus come into my heart prayer, that their children are saved. And that's just not actually true. There has to be a realistic heart and mind acceptance to giving your life over to Jesus. So I must have said that prayer 20 times as a kid in church services, and maybe even thinking that I meant it at the time, perhaps maybe when I was a teenager, but did I really? No, because I did not live my life as a person who you consider a Christian. What the word Christian means is a follower of Christ. So there's a lot of people out there claiming to be Christians, but they are living a worldly, secular life. And I'm here to tell you that those people are probably not Christians. Most people that I have met over my lifetime have never read the Bible, and yet they claim to be Christians. The problem with that is if you want to be a doctor or a nurse, just as an example, you have to go to school for it, and you have to read books on it, and you have to take tests and understand what it is and what's required for you to be that by your texts, your books that you're supposed to read and acquire the information and knowledge to do that. This is also required to be a Christian. So there's a lot of people out there that are claiming to be Christians, but they're not. And the reason why is because they don't follow the Bible, because they don't know it. Here's something before I get to my testimony that I want to ask to most people. And I want you to think about it, because there is a spiritual influence on us that's called an antichrist spirit. And I know that sounds crazy. It especially does to people who don't believe in this, but this is the reality of it. If I was to ask you if you read the Bible, most people are going to say yes, they have. And they're going to say it with a bit of an attitude. And the reality of most of them is they've never read the Bible, that they probably did what I did, which is as a teenager or as a kid, you were taken to church. They put a Bible in your lap. They tell you to look up the verse. That's not considered reading the Bible. Neither is it when you go home and you read a few chapters here and there over the course of your lifetime. If the same question was posed to you, have you read the Harry Potter novels, as an example? Most of you who hadn't would probably just say, nope, I haven't. Any one of you who maybe have read a few chapters of it still wouldn't say that you had read it. You'd simply say, no, I've read a few chapters of it, but I've never really read it. And that's the truth. But most people will have this attitude toward the Bible and actually, with an attitude, say that they've read it when in actuality they haven't. And I believe that there is a supernatural influence that's causing that to happen. So, fast forward. So though my mom was a Christian and I went to church a couple of times, I can't even say I was raised in a Christian home. It's just not the reality of it. And to no blame to my mom, she was also a secular woman. And by secular, it just simply means that you're not really following even the 10 Commandments in the Bible. And if you don't, or at least give it a really good effort, you're not technically a Christian. So my mom was not a good example of it. So a lot of people will say, well, you're just a Christian because you were raised in the West. Well, let me tell you something. Jesus Christ comes from Israel. That's not the West. Okay, so Christianity is not a West thing. In Israel and that part of the Middle East is where this religion comes from. But I'm not going to go into that. So again, I wasn't raised as a Christian. I thought for the most part throughout my life that I was a pretty good person because I wasn't a murderer. I wasn't a huge liar, though have I lied? Yep. I wasn't a major thief, but have I ever stolen anything? Yes. All of these things. But what I did to justify my actions was just compare myself to everybody else in the world and said, I'm not doing anything that's, outrageous. I don't really deserve jail for what I do. And I'm comparing myself to the people in my circle. That's not how it goes. So with all of that said, it wasn't until I was a live-in care provider for a gentleman who he could only see out of 1/3 of one of his eyes. And so he was sort of homebound. And he loved to watch movies. It was a big thing for him. And one of the movies that we were watching was, oh gosh, it figures I'm going to forget the name when I'm sitting down here to record this video. But in any case, it's the one with the monolith, and like the big red computer dot that's talking to people, and it's sort of in space. But anyway, it is directed by Stanley Kubrick. And I remember that name because Ernie, who's the guy who I lived with and took care of as a care provider, loved him as a director, just loved him. And I'm the type of person that I like to put a face to the name. So after we were done watching this movie, I went into my room and got on my laptop and said, who is Stanley Kubrick? To learn a little bit about who this director is that Ernie would rave about. And you know how on YouTube there's a column that comes up and it says video suggestions for you? Well, I kept seeing this come up that said, did the Illuminati kill Stanley Kubrick? Well, I don't know what it is about me, but whenever somebody dies, I'm kind of interested in that. So I decided to look up Stanley Kubrick's death. And without getting into all of that, I learned about the Illuminati. And what Illuminati means is illumination. Have you ever heard the term darkness into light when it comes to information? Oh, you were in the dark before, but wow, you saw the light. So darkness and light means you've become knowledgeable about something. You learned something. So the Illuminati means the illuminated ones. They're getting hidden knowledge. It's occultic. And as I studied who the Illuminati was from that moment when I looked up that video and watched it, I went down the rabbit hole. And I would end up learning that, in fact, the people who are considered the Illuminati or the enlightened ones, to not sound conspiratory, they worship Lucifer. And I actually got my hands on a book. It's a Masonic book. Oh my gosh. These things are important and I can't believe I'm forgetting them as I'm getting into this video. But it's written by a high-level 33rd degree Freemason. And in that book, it literally says, Lucifer is the light bearer. And again, what is light? It's information. It's hidden knowledge. Lucifer is the light bearer. That's what they say. So he is the bearer of their knowledge. In the Bible, I would learn after I read the Bible that Lucifer is called the angel of light, or light bearer, the bringer of the light. So that is tied into Lucifer. So the Bible actually validated that book, that Masonic book. And I would learn through deeper knowledge that, in fact, some of the most predominant people in any field, from high school teacher to police officer